Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Todd McFarlane Day. It's Friday, so we're looking at The Incredible Hulk issue 339, cover dated January 1987. We are very early on in Todd McFarlane's career, starting out at the Big Two. He's done Infinity Inc. and now he's doing The Incredible Hulk for Marvel. He'll kind of go back and forth there for a while in those mid to late 80s. After this, I believe he goes to DC and does Invasion, and in around the same time he jumps on The Amazing Spider-Man as well. So, you know, he's picking up some steam, but not yet the superstar he would become. So we still got a different cover artist, in this case Mr. Geiger. That's all I got. It's inked by McLeod, who I assume that's Bob McLeod, who inks a lot of stuff in and around this time. You know, Marvel house style kind of inking. He does Todd McFarlane actually in the early issues of Amazing Spider-Man before he's allowed to ink himself there. And this is the last issue that Todd McFarlane is not inking himself, and that our friend Jim Sanders III is inking him, I believe, is on this issue. We'll make sure when we check the credits. Cover, you know, just again, typical Marvel house style from the mid 80s. Still kind of reminiscent of the 70s. You know, McFarlane himself has mentioned that people were still, when he got to Marvel, were still kind of stuck in using the models and the looks of a lot of characters that were, you know, slightly dated, that were more from the 70s, right? Not really updating them. And, you know, that's kind of what he tried to do, at least on Spider-Man. And I would say on the Hulk as well, in his depiction of the Hulk, as we'll see in this issue, because as I mentioned last review, it seems like the inker's kind of pulling away a bit of his own style and really focusing on McFarlane's style and actually helping him out and helping him put it on the page, rather than trying to change it or hinder it or make it Marvel house style or something like that. So interesting design element that we're going to see within the comic as well. You know, there's a carnival and the Hulk's looking at those weird bent mirrors that make you look, you know, fat and skinny and tall and all this stuff. It's in the story as well, so I'm going to assume, maybe I'm wrong, but that Todd McFarlane kind of actually came up with that whole design thing, and the cover artist going through the story maybe and just a few pages and seeing that stuff is where he took the inspiration for this cover. I don't know if it was the other way around. If it is, well, I need to be stand corrected at some point by whoever has that information. That's pretty obscure stuff, so we'll see where that leads. Anyways, that's it for the cover. Let's crack her open, have a look inside. So right away, just like last issue, I feel like we're getting a lot more McFarlane. This is looking pretty darn close to the early Amazing Spider-Man issues, and not the ones inked by Bob McLeod, where again, his style tends to revert more to Marvel house style when someone else like that is inking him. Here, like I said, the inker seems to be moving out of the way, and we're slowly but surely starting to get more McFarlane. Examples of that, sometimes some of the cartooniness, the eyes tend to get really close together, and he's doing that here. It's always been a McFarlane thing, even when these faces maybe to a certain point are almost 80s kind of George Perez-y, I guess is how I describe them. The eyes are a bit closer together in a weird cartoony way. I don't know if it's from his manga influence or what that is exactly. And McFarlane just seems to do more and more of that as his career moves forward. This is the interesting page, obviously the splash that I was talking about. So to me, right away, McFarlane has just found whoever came up with the basic idea or design idea. McFarlane definitely has come up with a more interesting kind of slanted angle at it, and that's kind of where his strengths lie, kind of weird points of view that maybe, you know, comic book artists or mainstream comic book artists haven't yet you know, experimented with that much or something. I don't know how to describe it, but there's just, you know, something here that really works, and that makes the image dynamic and separates it from what's going on in around the same period by more kind of seasoned artists, I guess is how I put it. These depictions, you know, warped depictions of the Hulk within all those mirrors. Again, in this case, not even the Hulk actually there, so it's like a symbolic thing, right? Which is pretty cool, and an interesting way to use visuals on a comic book page that I really appreciate. Getting a lot of the cartooniness off on this page. There's some stuff like this character looks uncharacteristically Todd McFarlane. He looks more like Ken Stacy-ish, if that's, I don't know how weird or out there of a reference that is. If anyone knows Ken Stacy's art, like there's something there, and I know they know each other, so something going on there. I don't know. Oh yeah, so I forgot to mention on the last page, because there's a bit of it, but there's more of it here. I'm really starting to see, I really noticed in this issue, I'll call it the McFarlane hand. He just has a way of drawing that open hand, and it seems like the thumb should be pointing, you know, it's like really laid out, almost broken. It looks broken. To me, it looks broken, but, you know, it kind of works because of that cartoony style that he's really leaning into in this issue, as you can see from this sequence. And even the way the kid here kicks him in the The leg is, to me, somewhat reminiscent almost of like old newspaper cartoons or something. Like there's something really old-timey about this, and the fact that they're at a carnival. Anyway, so credits: Peter David, writer; Tom McFarlane, penciler; Jim Sanders III, inker; Rick Parker, letterer; and Petra Scotese, colorist. I'm trying to point out the most McFarlane-y stuff. Again, the bit of the McFarlane hand here. Here's a big one, right? Is this the first appearance of Felix? I don't know. It's the first time I've noticed him. He's probably on the other pages then, I guess, if you know, he's kind of a story element. Do we see him anywhere else? No? Okay, so it actually started here. Like this for sure. Inked by someone else, but man, is that ever a McFarlane kind of face. Hand, once again, this little scribble that he throws in there. That's, again, to me, that's like a weird, you know, metamorphosized version of manga that McFarlane has worked into his artwork, and he'll use this even throughout till Spawn. I'm pretty sure he's still using that once in a while. But, you know, we'll compare it to next issue when I review next week. Like, just if we look at this character, Alan Quartermain, who's been with us for a few issues, just in the way that he's being inked here is still the square kind of look and angular look to the man's face, which is fine. But McFarlane really gets kind of bloopy and cartoony next issue, and you'll see the same. Like, remember, if you're following, you know, the Tom McFarlane stuff, try to remember this face a little bit, and then you'll see how different it is next issue when the same character, Alan Quartermain, is now inked by McFarlane himself. It's very odd to me, like I'm not used to going back this far with McFarlane, is seeing such small panels and figures. That's what really kind of amazes me, because, you know, I got into McFarlane pretty late in the game with Spawn #2, and then I kind of backtracked, and, you know, I think his best period is probably, you know, end of Amazing Spider-Man, beginning of Spider-Man, and Spawn, right? That's kind of the pinnacle of McFarlane to me, anyways. And it's fun to see this early stuff, but again, I can't imagine him drawing such small panels and figures on Spawn at all. I don't think it ever happens, right? The visuals are just much bigger. Even on Spider-Man, I think he's already kind of stopped doing a lot of this stuff and doing a lot of splash pages and big panels, which is, you know, maybe what I'm more accustomed to. Again, when I look at these older comics before kind of the Image age, say what you will, but just the amount of dialogue I got to read here is a bit of a slog, I'll be honest. Love this sequence here. Seems very McFarlane, right? And the chaotic kind of beats and the fact that it's almost like a symbolic version of an earthquake, right? Things rumbling, and works well, obviously, with the concept of Banner turning into the Hulk. We can start to see McFarlane also kind of cementing his version of the Hulk and how he draws him. He does this kind of deal a lot, where you kind of see the highlights on top of the Hulk and the shadows, and also just this kind of 3/4 shot of the Hulk kind of hunched over. He just recycles over and over throughout the series, which is fine. I mean, he's kind of, again, solidifying his version of the Hulk, as it is one of the more memorable versions of it for sure. This, I thought, was a nice bit of pop culture from the 90s, or actually, excuse me, the 80s, the mid 80s, even before that. The 7-Eleven and the Slurpees they're getting here. Quartermain and Rick, the Hulk's kind of buddies, because he's, you know, pretty standoffish. And I gotta say, some of the proportions, though, throughout these issues, you know, the Hulk's supposed to be huge, but it does feel like, I mean, he's wider than these guys here, but they sure feel taller, you know what I mean? Maybe if he gets up, the proportions tend to shift throughout this issue. I'll try to point it out when I see it. I like this establishing shot here, where, you know, you just get the front end of the vehicle. So as an artist, you know, you don't have to draw the whole complicated bit, and this is probably done pretty quickly. And it still does a good job of giving us the setting, right? So it's just as effective, I think, as if you showed the whole vehicle. This is something I noticed from older comics that I don't know if people still do this, or they do it less, but I don't notice, I guess, as quite frequently in most modern comics, and most kind of, I would say, you know, not mainstream, in the sense that, you know, to change from one scene to another in the middle of a page like this just feels a little bit odd, right? McFarlane does his best to kind of change the scenery, and the panel's a bit narrower, kind of suggesting something else a bit different from what's going on at the top, but it's a little jarring to just mid-page have that sequence change, and I feel like it's something that you would wait for a page turn for, or that usually most modern comics are that way, where, you know, the change of scenery happens on the next page, rarely just in the middle, unless there's a really, really good story reason to do it and it just really makes sense. But I mean, I haven't really seen anything like that that jumped out at me. I like this first kind of shot of Tom McFarlane's version of the leader. His brain head has never been so gross. It almost looks like, liquidy and juicy, or at least like clay or something. It's pretty gnarly. Once again, McFarlane, is good at picking out the detail that you want to kind of work over or highlight or make more exaggerated, right? To make the characters seem more, again, extreme. Getting a bit of the McFarlane hand right here too. This here is interesting. This might be nothing, but this hand with just those two hatch lines on the side, I'm sure I've seen Rob Liefeld do something like that in X-Force, for sure. This panel's pretty interesting. I think with the ricochet of the bullets and stuff, very dynamic, using that kind of to almost put this character in a kind of weird dynamic prison is almost how I'd put it. It's pretty cool. This sequence, I think, again, McFarlane's trying some stuff and experimenting, and it kind of works. There's just one little problem I have with it, right? So you see the Hulk's face and the fact that, his ears and the side of his head are the edges of the border, I think in itself is pretty interesting, right? That could work in many other instances. Then you got the kind of panel where he's crushing this guy's gun in his hand, so obviously that hurts, right? But then you've got a sound effect. I assume it's a sound effect meant for the sound of what's going on here with the gun. And from what I can tell, there's just about enough information, I think. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it says crunch, right? Krunch. But I just don't know how effective it is at being clear. You know what I mean? I had to kind of think about it a little bit. If you're going to create a sound effect and obscure it to that point, I don't know if it works so much. I do like this kind of element of it. The sound effect, I'm not quite sure if there's another way of making it maybe just a little bit more visible. I'm not against hiding part of it. That can work, but you got to kind of narrow it down and work with the negative space so that the word is easily legible. Here, I find I had to think about it a little bit too much as I'm going through the story. What a nitpick, eh? So this kid with his hands, I think we're going to see another shot there. Once again, the McFarlane hands showing up, and a rare example of McFarlane using Kirby Crackle here. Interesting. I don't know if that was what was in the pencils and the inker kind of interpreted that way, or if that's what he intended. I can't remember him doing that much. There's this early Spawn drawing where I feel he does a little bit of that, but one of those first... I think it's pretty much the first kind of pinup that he did with Spawn, his arm out, and you can kind of see his power emanating from his hands, and it does look a bit Kirby-ish. Yeah, so right here, once again, a perfect example of not just the McFarlane hands, but the McFarlane reflective effect that he uses all throughout his career. You're starting to use it here. He probably used it in Infinity Ink before, of course. Notice as well, like when he starts to ink himself, it's going to be similar in the sense that he's not spotting a lot of black areas on the figures, right? You can kind of see it mostly throughout this issue, except for Rick, who's got obviously a dark jacket. And that's going to continue when he inks himself. I'm pointing it out because next issue it's going to become really obvious that early on, while he was drawing at least the Incredible Hulk, and I think early Amazing Spider-Man as well, he just wasn't throwing, big black shapes in there. He was almost fine lining it like a GF Darrow, but with all the extra McFarlane noodling. Clear line style, I guess it's called. It traces his origins back to Tintin, the comic from Belgium, right? Bande dessinée. Here's an example that's obviously just going against the grain of everything I just said, but I do feel like in the hatching and stuff, like maybe this is more of the inker's work, or at this point, I mean, it should be pretty simple to throw down a dark shape on a guy's profile. So, and again, I don't know how a traditionalist illustrator would kind of, rate how well these effects work here. But I guess, they do their job of fading off into here, which is a flashback sequence. Like, look at all this dialogue that you have to read to learn about this kid with the funny hands. And then there's this insert panel here, and it's really small. And I almost feel like this is not Todd McFarlane, right? So I was early on when I was going through the issue for the review, I was like, is this the first Todd McFarlane drawn Spider-Man, right? In Incredible Hulk, not an Amazing Spider-Man. So if anyone has any info on this, I feel like this is either a statted panel from when the story happened that he's going back to. There's a little, see, it's one of those deals where, oh, right here, there it is. The little star leads you to. So it happened in Peter Parker number 118. Maybe I should go look at that comic. I don't own it. Maybe I find it online. I'm going to note that down. In Peter Parker number 118. So I'm going to find out if this panel is actually in that comic, or if this is possibly a Todd McFarlane drawn Spider-Man, and technically would be the first one. Not sure if I'm onto something here, but we'll find out. Getting, again, these great 3/4 shots here. This one's a little more interesting and cartoony and dynamic in its movement. The Hulk's kind of angry and, you know, almost looks like he wants to charge into Rick here, or at least past him. And then there's other poses that I feel like this one's very cool and feels dynamic and moving, and this one feels kind of posy and a little awkward, right? McFarlane's still got some growing pains in there and still doing kind of odd, quirky, anatomical stuff. Again, the size of these panels here just amazes me that McFarlane actually did this and drew all this detail. Pretty good shot of the bathroom, I gotta say, with the water rushing and the toilet and the open window. All that's really good. And I really like this panel down here. It's a small one, but you know, the character kicking down the door here, I think is really well done. Very cartoony, of course. So we're back to our mirror motif, and McFarlane's having fun there, doing lots of different versions of you know, the basic Incredible Hulk face that he's kind of crafted at this point. Just a weird shot here where the ear is cut off in a weird way. I feel like you would still see it, or maybe it should have been on this side of the muscle. So it just looks a little odd. Something I noticed too, once the ear's not there, is he's almost take the toupee or the weird hair off, and he's almost starting to look like the Thing, right? You know, McFarlane's really exaggerating the brow there. Which is, you know, how he would do it, of course, but it's kind of growing to a size that's, at least in this one here, looks like he's got a hematoma. A little too much there, but he's really, you know, pushing that Frankenstein look. And an old trick of McFarlane's, I guess he'd already started doing back then. If he did, I'm pretty sure he did this whole thing. The lettering looks a little bit different, but he drew, you know, instead of drawing a whole something where the door is being smashed by, I assume, the Hulk, right? He just, you know, did a quick lettering job, and in the negative space, you know, has a door rushing past with some, this is like, again, Saturday morning cartoons in the newspapers back in the day, kind of vibe. So I feel, yeah, there's almost a bit of an editorial cartooning or again, newspaper cartooning influence on Todd McFarlane that's maybe a little more obvious back in this period where, you know, he's having to draw more panels, pages take longer to get through. So, you know, he's just finding expedient ways to get through those with some old-timey techniques, as we saw with the kid kicking Banner in the leg at the beginning of the issue. And again, this little tidbit with the door down here and this effect just to me feels almost like Archie comics, right? And it amazes me to see him drawing such small panels here, because it's a little jarring. I'm just used to his more, you know, confident, I've become a superstar kind of style. I can draw big if I want, which is cool, and that's what I loved about Todd McFarlane and his crazy designs and stuff. All of that was great. But still working a little bit more house style here. The van that they're driving around has become quite simpler in this issue. Don't know if he's still got the toy lying around or if he's following that quite as much. It works for the comic, right? And then we get a kind of a cool sequence to finish this whole issue off that I like. It just reminds me personally of 2001: A Space Odyssey. I feel like maybe he referenced a picture for this, because like the moon seems kind of traced a little bit, which is fine. I don't mind. He probably drew the figures, or the figures were already in the picture and he used them, or, you know, clothed them differently so it fits the characters. Like this down, maybe not so, at least this guy to me feels traced. So he found a cool picture. Maybe he threw this in, added it in, but you know, all of that kind of weird there. Looks like Snake Mountain. And the textures on the mountains, I mean, there's a bit of McFarlane stuff here, but they're a little more kind of a 70s vibe almost in the technique used. But yeah, just all these shots with the moon in the background and stuff, just really like, because again, it reminds me of 2001: Space Odyssey. Should there be stars? Should there not be stars? Who knows for sure? If you know the answer, let me know. There we go, guys. That is my review of The Incredible Hulk issue 339. If you're still watching and you're following all the reviews, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you being there. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. Really helps the channel out, helps us grow, helps us get towards our goal of 500 subscribers, where YouTube actually recognizes us as kind of a, you know, real official channel. So tell your friends, tell everyone out there who are into comic books just like we are, to come check out the channel. Thanks again for watching. Have yourselves an awesome day.
Like! Subscribe! Like!
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.